As tragic as domestic violence is for the abused partner, the effects on children can make the situation even worse.
Children who grow up in domestic violence homes usually grow up in a situation of complete uncertainty. They never know what's going to happen from one minute to the next. They grow up in fear. They're fearful of him. They're extremely sad for their mothers. We see a lot of kids that come into our shelter that have developed these coping mechanisms which involve taking care of the mom. They believe their job is to make her okay and to make it okay for them to be in the shelter, for her to be able to stay away. They also grow up very confused because often, they're taught that he is their father and that they should love, honor, and respect him at the same time that person who they love, honor, and respect is hurting the other most important person in their life, which is their mother. And that's just in the cases where the child isn't being physically abused by him. It's solely, right on her. Children of domestic violence homes tend to have some significant issues in school. They tend to act out. There's a higher rate of substance abuse, anything to try to dull the pain, cope with what's happening. They can be traumatized by it, post-traumatic stress disorder, long time kind of issues. But the connection between domestic violence perpetrators and domestic violence children is that about 60% of men who are beating their wives are also beating their children. So one of the things that we do in this field is we work with people who have direct contact with children to look at what's going on with the mom behind the scenes, because you're so likely to find that the mom's being hurt as well. The flip side of that is that every mother and child that comes into a domestic violence center, the child is screened for child abuse. And the numbers of child abuse calls that we have to make in our centers is really high because 60% of the kids that we're seeing are going to have been hurt by him too.
Of course, the ultimate tragedy is when a child's exposure to domestic violence continues the cycle in their life when they become adults.
Same effect it has had on me. Yeah, my stepdad and my father were both abusive, alcoholics and abusive. And I thought that was the way to handle things. Do what I say, do it now and shut up. Anything I do to them, for them, or without them affects their life, and it also have effect on their children. So in order to stop that cycle, I have to put them first. First of all, be honest with them about me being abusive to their mother, why I did it, where I picked it up from, and then try and teach them the right way about doing things and how to be constructive in them so that they won't fall into the same cycle.
Unfortunately, even though a domestic violence victim needs support, their friends and family are sometimes not the best people to turn to.
Well, sometimes family and friends are not the best person for a woman to talk to because they love her. They're too close, or they may be too close to him. They may not completely understand what's really happening in that relationship and be the first person to help them. The number one thing I always tell to people is just listen to her. I mean, one of the tragedies I think about that happens in these relationships is the family and friends get tired of it. You'd like to think that the family and friends stay there through thick and thin until, something can happen, but that isn't what traditionally happens. What traditionally happens is the family and friends get tired of hearing about it. They carry the own myths and their own stereo sort of types with them, and they believe that there must be something wrong with her if she's staying. They're only seeing a tip of the iceberg. The women rarely tell anybody how bad it really is in the relationship. They only tell them little bitty things, like I call it the tip of the iceberg. They're only hearing the tip of the iceberg, or the one still frame in a movie video. They're getting that much of the information. So they can't understand why she doesn't just walk away. I just talked to somebody a week ago who said to me, I am just so tired of hearing about it. I mean, I can't take anymore. Well, that's what the whole goal is that he's trying to create, is a scenario where she has no one left. And once she has no one left, no one that's willing to just listen to her, it's all over. He's got complete and total control of her. The other thing that we see are women come into our shelter and they're devastated because the whole time that this has been happening to them, they're losing their relationships with the other people in their life that they care, and it makes them extremely sad.
Now you need to know about some realities you should prepare for when outside agencies get involved in stopping domestic violence. The first reality is that reporting domestic violence to law enforcement will most likely result in an arrest of the abuser and some type of criminal charge being filed. However, you have a moral obligation to protect yourself and a legal obligation to protect your children. So the reality of an arrest should not stop you from calling the police.
First time it happened is when the legal consequences came in. But again, I always denied it. Well, if you hadn't called the cops or if you hadn't said what you said, we wouldn't be in this situation, and that was never the case.
It's one of the great tragedies of domestic violence that not anybody really knows how to address. If she calls law enforcement in today's day and age where there's a preferred arrest policy, where when law enforcement comes out to a house after she's dialed 911, if they find probable cause that domestic violence did occur and that he was the primary aggressor, meaning that it's most likely he's the one that did it, they will arrest him because that's what law enforcement policy says. What we often know are the women don't want him to go to jail. All they want is for right then for him to stop hurting her and the children. They take him to jail, and the guys can lose their jobs for what they did, which is, sort of the crime and punishment. You do the crime, then you're going to get punished. The problem is he loses his job. The children no longer have income coming in. We see women losing their homes. It's not what they typically want. What they really want is the violence to end. But our response to it as a society often ends up looking like we're hurting her rather than helping her. And I don't necessarily know what the alternative is. I mean, I have long-winded ideas about all that, but the absolute truth is she doesn't want him to lose his job.
The next reality is that when the courts and state agencies get involved, it is possible, under certain circumstances, that your custody of your children could be jeopardized.
Women need to be afraid of that. They do get their children taken away from them, being accused of being an unfit mother. And in particular in this state, there is a phrase that the Department of Children and Family uses called failure to protect. And literally what failure to protect means is that if you fail to keep the children safe from the person that is hurting them, you can be charged as well. And women do lose their children here. They lose them because they don't leave him. So the Department of Children and Families will literally remove the children rather than try to help her leave the relationship with the kids. So they do need to be afraid of that. That's a legitimate issue.
You may find these realities discouraging, especially if you're already in a vulnerable situation. But the good news is that there are domestic violence support groups who understand all of these issues very well, and they can help you make a plan for leaving an abusive relationship in a way that will protect you, your children, and your rights as a parent.
The reason that there are domestic violence centers, our number one job in the world is to do what's called safety planning. The best experience for us is when we get to work with women while they're in the relationship on not only how to address some of those things before they happen, but also to how to get out of the relationship safely. We call it safety planning. We literally work with her to develop a plan over a period of time to get out of that relationship, lessening some of the impacts of all of those things that we've talked about, lessening the impact of financial loss, lessening the impact of any kind of legal kind of liability to her. It can be something so simple as for a period of time having the women documenting their medical files about the injuries, getting doctors to actually call it what it is, saving money in whatever way they can. There are thousands of women in the state that get out every single day safely without any real huge negative impact on them besides emotional losses. because there's an enormous number of professionals out here whose whole job is to help them get out of that relationship as safely as we can. The other thing that we know is that up to 75% of domestic violence victims do leave. They leave without any help at all from anybody. They walk out the door the first or second time that he hits them, they start their life over, they take their kids in tow, and they're gone. They may suffer financial consequences for doing that, or some negative thing that all people suffer when there's a relationship over, but it doesn't mean that their life is over. Living in violence is a horrible way to live. There's no reason why one person has to live in a relationship where another person is hurting them. So I think that there's a lot of reason for somebody to leave. It's how they leave and who helps them leave that becomes absolutely paramount. It is extremely important to respect that leaving can be hurtful and dangerous. The other thing is what some of the things that I was saying about the negative consequences of being in the relationship, failure to protect, those often happen when the woman feels like she has no other options, so that she's not getting help from anybody. And those things happen when you stay in the relationship. So the negative consequences are more related to staying than they are to going. And if you work with somebody to help you leave, you can really negate some of the real negative things that happen when you leave.